Hello all, welcome back. In this video, we are going to look at Blob Storage, and this is lesson 2 of the third module called Storage Account. If we look at this module, we'll see what is Blob Storage and what are Blob containers, and we will look at different performance tiers available with Blob Storage and what is Blob access policy and at how the pricing works, finally with a demonstration. If we talk about blob storage, it is a REST based object storage which is hosted in the cloud. We can use it to store unstructured data. The data can be of any type, either it can be text or binary data. We look at the scenarios in which we want to use Azure blobs. We can use it to store any type of documents or images, and we can expose those documents over a HTTP endpoint, web browser. So in this way, we are not hosting any web server and we can directly expose the objects over the internet. And next might be storing files like video and audio and files for distributor access as well. And other scenario might be to store backup files, or during a disaster recovery we can use Azure storage to store the artifacts, or even for long-term storage in case of archiving we can store it because blob storage is very cheap. There might be scenarios in which we want to do analysis on your data, and in that case we might need to have a common data store which can pull data from different sources and we can perform the analytics on top of it. So we can use blobs as a common data store as well. And if we look at the structure of blob storage, as shown in the picture in the slide, we will have a top level storage account, and under that we will have a blob container, and inside the blob container we will have blob. So we will look at what is blob containers. So blob container is again a logical container service which is required if we want to use blob. So whenever we want to store some blob, we should put it inside the container, and we can create unlimited number of containers inside a storage account, and we can create multiple storage account inside a subscription. So there are some limitations on how much data is stored in the storage account, and it is not based on number of containers or the number of blobs. Generally for few regions like US and Europe, it will be like 2 petabytes of storage. For other regions, it's roughly around 500 terabytes. So this may change anytime based on the infrastructure at that particular moment. But keep in mind that we can create multiple containers and blobs, and it's just restricted by the size of the files or the data which is stored in the entire storage account. So there are three type of access level which is defined with a container. And first is what we call private. We chose the container as private, then we won't allow any anonymous access. And if we choose access level as blob, we can expose only the blobs inside that container for anonymous public access. So in this case, user need to know the exact full URL of the blob. Say for example, storage account name dot blob.core.windows.net slash the container name and the actual blob file name. If you know the exact URL, you will be able to access it if the container is set to blob access. And next thing is what we call container access. And in this scenario, we expose the listing of the entire container as well for anonymous read. So in this case, if the user knows just the storage account name and the container name, he can list the entire bunch of files inside the container and he can access those individual files as well. So this is basically the public access, and blob access is semi-public access where if we know the entire URL, he can access it. But for container access, if we just know the container name, he can access everything inside it. So next, when you're creating a container or the storage account, we have three type of performance tiers available based on how we want to store the data. If we talk about hot tier, so it's ideal for scenarios in which you want to frequently access the files. Then we want to keep that as hot tier. And if we choose cool tier, it's ideal for files is stored for longer period of time, say for example, 30 days or more. In that case, we might store that files in a cool tier. And the third category is what we call archive tier, and this is ideal for scenarios in which we want to store the data for long-term retention. So in this case, we need to make sure that we are storing the files for at least 180 days or longer. And one thing to note is that if we are storing the files in archive tier, it may be stored offsite and there might be a significant retrieval time, say for example around 8 to 12 hours to get the data back to online. So this is mainly for uh, archiving in scenarios like regulatory purposes. And based on these tiers, pricing also varies. Like since hot tier stores data which is accessed frequently, we want to make the data cheaper for accessing and it might be costlier for storage. And coming to the cool tier, the main objective is to store the data. So the data storage part might be cheaper and the accessing part might be costlier. And similarly for archive, the storage part might be very cheaper, but the accessing part might be costlier. So we will look at what I mean, the storage cost versus accessing cost, the pricing section. So we have the capability of uploading the blobs and downloading the blobs directly from Azure portal as well, or we can use Azure Storage Explorer as well if you want to have different level of controls. And when we are trying to upload blobs, there are three type of blob which we can choose. One is what we call block blobs, and it's the default one. And we just want to store object files, we can use that type called block blob. And page blob is used to store files which have frequent IO operations. It's ideal for scenarios where we want to store VM images or VHDs, then we can store that as page blobs as well. But keep in mind that block blob is the object storage and page blob is mainly for storing files which has frequent read write operations. And there is a third category of blob called append blobs. And in this type of blob, we can't modify the file, but we can append the file with data. And it's useful for storing the server logs. And once we create a blob with particular type, let's say for example block blob, we can't change it to another type called page blob. We have to delete it and recreate again with a different type. Next thing is what we call blob access policies. And once we create a container, so there is a concept of shared access signatures. So shared access signature is a way to provide access to other person without providing the entire master key of the storage account. So in this case, we will create a unique URL, and that URL will provide access, like whether the user can read or modify or delete the files, and it will work in specific time frame. Say it starts from particular date and it ends at particular date. So that is what we call it as shared access signature, or in short SAS key or the SAS URL. And there are two different type of SAS available. One is what we call service SAS and other is what we call account SAS. So service SAS basically works with single service inside a storage account. Say for example, for Blob we have a specific service SAS, and for files we have a different service SAS, and for queues we have a different one, and so on. Whereas account SAS works across the storage account. So once we create a single account SAS, it will work for any of the files, the blob storage or the files or the table or the queues. And again, whatever we have seen so far under the SAS falls under what we call as ad hoc SAS. The reason why I call it ad hoc SAS is that once we create the SAS URL, that URL will work until the time expires, or if we roll out the key which we have used uh, creating the SAS. But there is a better way to use SAS URLs, and that is what we call it as storage access policies. So what we can do is that we can create an access policy for a container, and we can define that specific policy. If you see that a screenshot in the slide. So we can add a policy name and we can choose the specific set of permissions. Either we want to allow read, create or write, and we can define what is the start time and end time of the policies. And once we create the policies, and whenever we are trying to create a new SaaS URL, we can associate that SaaS with a particular policy. So in case if we want to revoke a particular access, instead of rolling out the storage master key, we can just revoke the policy. So in this way, we can easily manage the access without impacting others. And if you note that we are creating access policy within a container that's specifically within Blob Storage. So it's basically a category of service SaaS. And we can't create access policy for account SaaS. We can set up these access policies for all the four categories as well: blob, files, tables, and queues. But we can't create a single policy for all of those. We have to create different policies for each one. So next, we'll look at storage pricing. So there is a pricing component involved for storing the files in Azure storage. That is what we call it as storage cost. And based on the performance tier which we choose, either it be hot storage or cold storage or archive storage, the pricing varies as well. And certainly the pricing differs based on specific Azure region as well, and the type of storage account as well, whether we are choosing premium storage or the general purpose storage as well. And other cost which is involved is whenever we are accessing the data, we incur data access cost and the transaction cost as well. And there are categories of storage account in which we can store it in multiple regions. Say for example, in case of geo redundant storage, we store it in two data centers or two Azure regions. So in this case, whenever we are storing the data in primary region, there will be a copy made automatically and it is transferred to the paired region. So there will be certain data transfer cost as well in addition to the storage cost and the transaction cost involved. And whenever we want to pull the data out of Azure, there is again an outbound data transfer cost as well. So in case if you are accessing the data from on premises, so you are pulling the data out of Azure, in that case you have to incur outbound data transfer cost as well. And when we are changing the storage tier from, let's say for example, cold to hot or hot to cold or archive, so there is a price component involved in this transition as well. So what you need to understand is that, so mainly there are type of cost involved. One is the actual data storage cost and other is the data access cost. And based on the type of storage, if it is geo replication, there is data transfer involved across the region, so there will be data transfer cost as well. And whenever we are taking data out of Azure, there will be egress cost as well. So these are the main category of cost involved with Azure storage. Now we will look at a demo on how to create containers from Azure portal. So if you look at Azure portal, the last video we have seen how to create storage using different methods, either using portal or CLI or PowerShell. I'll go to a sample resource group which I have created previously in the past video, and I choose a container or the storage account, and under that there is a separate section called blob service. So under that I'll click on blobs, and I'll create a new container, and I can name the container as container 1, and I have an option to choose public access level as well. Either I can choose it as private or blob or container, and the default recommendation is always choose private unless there is a good business reason to expose it over the internet. So I'll choose it as private, and I choose OK. It has successfully created a container. It's pretty quick because it's just a logical container. And once I click on the container, I'll be able to upload files. So I just click on upload, and I can choose the files as well. So I'm trying to upload a JSON file. One thing to note that there is an option called advanced, and if we click on that, we will be able to choose the blob type as well. So I'm choosing it as blob. It's because it's just a JSON file. But if I want to upload other files like a virtual machine disk, I can choose it as page blob. Or if I'm storing log files, I can open blob as well. And we have option to customize the block size, the blob, and if I click on upload, it will go ahead and upload the file. Now it has successfully uploaded, and if you want to view these files, I can click on it and it will show all the properties of the file. So I can see a public URL as well, but since we have made the container as private, I won't be able to access it through the browser. We can create snapshots as well. Another thing is the access tier. So this is currently in hot tier, but if I want to choose it as full tier, I can, and I can save it. I don't want to save anything, so I am just discarding the changes, and I can either delete or even I can download the files and see what is inside there. So next thing is generating a shared access signature. So here I can choose the permission which I want to allow for these files using SAS key. I'm fine with read access, and I can choose specific start date and expiration date. And if I want to specifically allow particular IPs, I can specify those IPs, and I can choose the protocols as well. And finally I need to choose the signing key. This is the key for the storage account. So this is what we call service SAS, and we are not using policy here. So once I click on generate blob SAS and URL, I get a complete SAS URL as well, or if I just want the other part of the URL apart from the main file, I can get the other part as well. I can share this with other users and they'll be able to download our files. Next thing I want to show you is something called access policies. We can create a new policy for this particular container and define the permissions for the policy. So in this case, I name the policy as P1 and I just select read access. After that, I can choose some start time and I can choose some end time. Then I can create OK. I save on it. I have just created a policy and I can use this policy to create services as well. But Azure portal has certain limitations. We can't do it here, but we will be able to do it from other methods like .NET SDKs or from Storage Explorer as well. So now we switch back to Azure Storage Explorer and we have logged in using Azure account. So here we are able to see the different storage accounts we have created, and this is the storage account under which I have created the container called container 1. And if we look at the container, you are able to see the file which we have uploaded. Again, if we right click on the file, we will be able to again create shared access signature as well. And if I click on it, we will be able to even see the access policies as well. This feature was missing in the portal, but we can link the new SAS with this access policy and I can create a SAS signature as well. And whenever I want to revoke this signature, I can just delete the policy and this SAS won't work. But apart from that, there won't be any change with the access of the storage account. If, for example, if some application uses the storage account keys, that won't get impacted. So this is better way of providing access. And one thing I forgot to mention is that we have a top level storage account and under that we have a container and we have just added the files directly. But let's say for example, in case if we want to have multiple folder structure under the storage account, then technically Azure storage can't have that structure because this is just a 3-level hierarchy. But what we can do is that we can name the files in such a way that we can name it as folder name slash subfolder name slash then the actual file name. In that case, the actual file name contains the folder names as well. And whenever we are viewing it from Storage Explorer, it automatically shows it as file inside folder. But it's just the file name, but Storage Explorer emulates in a way that we are able to see the folders as well. But just keep in mind, those are the actual file names. Even if you see the folders, it's not the folder. So that's all for this video. Thank you.